Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining PHCA for today's webinar, Engaging the Media, Answering the Call, Telling Your Story. I'm Wendy Johnson with the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. PHCA offers monthly webinars to members to receive updates from department staff on regulations, learn from industry experts on current trends and practices, and to gain a better understanding of practical application tools to equip you so that you may continue to provide the highest level of quality care possible. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website later today. The webinar has been approved for one continuing education credit for PHCA member nursing home, personal care, and assisted living administrators. Certificates will be emailed later today, and please note that effective April 1st, I am now required to upload the credits to the NAB registry. So hopefully you have all registered for this free service and have provided us with your unique NAB registry number. Following the webinar, I'll be sending a link to a quick survey. Please complete this survey, and if you are participating in a group setting, have each participant also complete the survey. Your feedback is important to us and our speaker. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. However, throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit questions using your questions pane on the right hand of your screen, and our presenter will address them at the end of the presentation. Now for today's webinar. Today's webinar is being presented by Knaus, Managing Director, Ceisler Media and Issue Advocacy. What do you do when a reporter shows up unexpectedly at your facility? How do you answer a press call inquiring about a situation at your center? This webinar will give you tips to help talk confidently and navigate any challenging conversation. Interviews give you a chance to comment productively, correct inaccuracies, build credibility, and position your center as a leader. Media relations isn't just about responding. The webinar will also help you identify the opportunities you have to share with local reporters the good stories about the work you're doing in your facilities. Your learning objectives for today's webinar include 1, recognizing the media focus on long-term care, 2, understanding the art of the interview, 3, appreciating the value of preparation, and lastly, finding opportunities to tell your story. I'll now turn the webinar over to Kurt.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. That was a terrific introduction and summary about what we're going to talk about today. This is our second large-scale media training for PHCA, but honestly the first one that we've ever done by webinar. The last one was at the convention in 2017, so thanks for having us back. Typically when we do these webinars, what we'd like to do is run through a PowerPoint and go through these tips and techniques and then put you all on camera and see what you learned and how you did. Obviously, we don't have the capacity to put you on camera today, but we do have a couple clips that we're going to show that highlight some of the things that we want to talk about as we move through the presentation and provide you with some tips and techniques of both about how to manage a call when it comes in, as well as being bold and reaching out to media to tell your own story. First, just a little bit of background about who we are. Ceisler Media is an issue advocacy firm, one of the largest in the state with offices in Harrisburg, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. In short, whatever you do to run a campaign for a person, we pretty much do for an issue in terms of organizing, developing a message, and then working on media placement for those stories. We've been engaged with PHCA for more than a decade now, helping with overall media and advocacy efforts, from crises to budget to capital rallies like the one coming up here in June. We've also been engaged with a number of individual organizations and companies that work in long-term care, again, helping them with either crises or just their general public relations and marketing. Just about me personally, I've done more than 25 years in the communications field. I've been a former reporter, a former communications director, a former press secretary, and have been with Ceisler Media over a decade now. And I just offer that as perspective so that you know you're going to be hearing from someone who has both had to ask the questions as a reporter and also provide answers as a spokesperson. I wish I could ask for sort of a show of hands. You know, I'm not sure how many people have ever really done a media interview, but I'm pretty sure, unless you're a communications professional on the line, you probably don't want to do a media interview, especially in the climate that we're operating in today. I guess we're just here to tell you, and as Wendy gave in her summary at the beginning, there's a good chance that you're going to get a call sooner or later. The sector that you're in, long-term care, is under intense scrutiny, both at state, regional, and local levels. So there's a pretty good chance that a call is going to be coming in. And what we want to do is make sure that when that phone does ring, you're ready to take the call. So what we're going to go over today is just mastering the art of the interview. We're going to go over some tips and techniques for successful engagement, both proactively and reactively. Again, I talked about some of the clips that we're going to see in place of putting folks on camera so we can see from those examples. And then we're going to talk about ways to tell your story. And then before we close, as a former reporter, I'm going to give you some examples about how reporters like to ask questions and the techniques they use to try to elicit responses from you so that you're at least a little bit familiar about how they do their job. When I think about long-term care, what I think about is how all of you who are in this profession actually describe to people what you do. Because the reality is a lot of people have very different interpretations about long-term care. They simply don't understand exactly what you do or the challenges you face each and every day. This is a reputation battle that we have been fighting for a long time in long-term care. I think it's one that we're going to keep fighting, and it's one, quite honestly, that's getting much more challenging as your day-to-day operations become much more challenging. So it's really important for us to be out there explaining what we do, how we do it, the challenges we face, so that people have a better understanding of our day-to-day work. First things first is to know what you're about, know what your story is. When we engage with a client, one of the first things that we do is we really sit down to come up with what we would call a messaging palette. These are the 4 or 5 key points that really define who you are and what you do. These are your mission statements, and it's what you want to convey, and it's what you want people to remember about you. For this presentation, the 4 that we've come up with all center around a single theme. You know, Pennsylvania's long-term care network ranks among the nation's best, providing help to those in need and comfort to families. Demand for services is high, but every resident can take comfort knowing that no matter the setting, high-quality care is available. That your facilities are lifeline for families who can no longer safely care for loved ones at home. And that the employees, the caregivers, really do commit themselves to providing the compassion and dignity that residents deserve to get healthy and stay healthy. So again, these are our foundational points that we're going to work through, and it's something before every interview you should have in mind prior to discussing with a reporter, because these are all points you want to pivot to. And if you notice in all 4 points, if you see a theme, then you're pretty much spot on, because what we want to do, no matter what the point is be very consistent in what we say, and we want to repeat it over and over again, because that's what we want to be heard. And there's no harm in repetition. A good message is something that you really want to do is say over and over again. So the theme here obviously is about the level of care you provide and the quality of your workforce. Now these points may differ slightly depending on the facility, whether you're skilled nursing, assisted living, or personal care. But generally, we always want to come back to these key points about the high quality care. And if you want to see some additional messaging, depending on the sector that you're in, I would encourage you to visit the 21st Century Long-Term Care portal that we developed with PHCA. The link is there, but it offers some additional guidance some background that goes deeper than these 4 foundational points into each one of the sectors that you're in. We're going to switch now to watch our first video, and here's the setup. Golden Living was part of a news conference with SCIU where they were going to announce a wage agreement, a good news piece. The news conference was held, however, in an area of the state where one local TV station was really intensely reporting and scrutinizing on long-term care generally, nursing homes specifically, the Department of Health and its policies. So you can pretty much anticipate that this is not going to be a great news story.
The president of Embattled Golden Living Nursing Homes answers our questions about recent violations.
It was broken several stories over the last year about disturbing inspection reports, medication errors, filthy conditions, even maggots found in a resident's feeding tube. Amanda St. Hilaire continues her investigation. Amanda.
Alicia Dennis, Golden Living held a press conference this afternoon discussing in part a renewed focus on improving care for residents. Naturally, we had a lot of questions about that focus, about that care, and that led to an interesting back and forth.
Now and at the end of their lives, they depend on us to give them the best possible care.
Much of this press conference was spent celebrating a pay raise for Golden Living certified nursing assistants, not celebrating hundreds of residents, family members, even Golden Living employees who have called us in the Attorney General's office, saying the facilities are filthy and understaffed.
I have here several of the Department of Health inspections, and they show violations such as, quote, very strong odors of urine and feces, dirty wheelchairs, staff giving residents higher dosages of medications than prescribed by physicians.
It took us several minutes just to list all the violations.
Failing to conduct neurochecks after resident falls, dirty oxygen tank filters. How do you explain this list of violations just at 3 mid-state facilities in the last 3 months?
Sure, thank you for asking that question. The reality is the skilled nursing facility sector is, I believe, the second most highly regulated business in the United States. The only type of profession or industry that is more highly regulated is nuclear power.
The president of Golden Living added that violations are quickly fixed.
The notes on these inspection reports do show that most of these are repeat violations. And in fact, the 2 Camp Hill facilities, between the 2 of them, have at least 16 non-compliant inspection reports over the last 2 years. So at what point do those stop becoming isolated incidents and start becoming patterns?
So
she went on to say that the inspections are supposed to highlight areas of improvement.
Would you classify an odor of urine and feces as an area of improvement?
To not get into how everything works in the nursing home, I will say this: we're all humans, and we all have personal things that occur during the day.
Are you saying these lists of violations are comparable to other nursing home facilities in the area?
So I can tell that you have a lot of questions. Rather than addressing this in a press conference, I would love to sit down with you on a one-on-one basis.
Of course, we would love to take Golden Living up on that invitation. We also do want to point out that just released today another out-of-compliance Department of Health inspection for a Golden Living facility in the mid-state. We're still going through it. We'll let you know what we find. As for tonight, we just didn't have time.
So this is a point in the program where I would usually ask the audience, raise your hand if you have, what critiques you would offer. But I'm just going to run through a few things. Number one, you need to know your media market. This is probably not, this is a good news event, probably not the right place or right time to do it via a televised news conference or inviting media in, when you probably could have got just as much good coverage locally by issuing a written release. But if you are going to call an event, you really can't let media commandeer it. The CEO there finally did get to what she needed to do, but it was at the end where she said, I know you have a lot of questions about this, and that's exactly what you need to do. You need to step back, reiterate what the event is about, and promise to get back to the reporter and bring it back to what the news conference is about in the first place. But then from a professional standpoint, the person to the right of the CEO on the screen was the communications director or the PR professional. And at some point, I don't know how uncomfortable it was for all of you, but when I watched that video, it's incredibly uncomfortable to have the reporter just sitting there reading off every single violation. I mean, if you get through one or two, that's normally where I would jump in and say, you know, we're familiar with our own surveys. Again, this is a wage announcement. We're happy to talk to you about it. So the real key from this video is, number one, to make sure you know your media market and go in with a strategy and you're prepared and you really understand the risk versus reward. And secondly, know that you are in control of the event and you can't let anybody commandeer it. And don't think something like this can't or won't happen to you, because now more than ever, every long-term care facility, especially nursing homes, are under intense scrutiny. And it's maybe not because you held a news conference, it's strictly because of something that you're filing that you're required to file. They could be your health service surveys, Medicare cost reports, any sort of regulatory compliance, or just media tracking where one reporter sees what another reporter is writing about long-term care. So, you know, in this slide, we picked out Lancaster newspapers because this reporter, who is the health reporter for the paper, does a story about once a month where she just goes in, looks at the Department of Health, pulls the surveys from all the nursing homes in Lancaster County, and writes a story about them. And if there are points in the surveys that are more egregious or actionable, that those nursing homes can expect a call. But it's not just in Lancaster where this is happening. It's not isolated to there. These are a couple more examples. They're happening all across the state. And it's really just the tip of the iceberg. The topics run the gamut as well. They're all the result of public reporting that's required of you. And because it's a public report, you can expect that a reporter would expect you to talk publicly about something that is on the public record, thus the calls that you're going to be getting, whether you like them or not. So the call comes in, and you're ready for it. You're going to be asked for an interview sooner or later, but you know your key messages and you're ready to go, right? Well, a couple things. Unless you are the communications professional for your organization or company, I'm guessing many of you are caretakers or administrators. I think number one, all of your interviews should really be prearranged. Work with management or seek PHCA's professional help. The key here is don't just pick up the phone and start talking. You really want to understand the nature of the request, what they're looking for, but more importantly, you want to know what your facility's media policy is and gain any approval before conducting an interview, or just as importantly, letting a camera into your facility. Generally, reporters are really accommodating. You know, they're interested in getting the story and talking to the right person. There might be some gotcha things out there, but for what we're talking for the most part, someone's going to be reaching out to you for contact. Just know what your policies are and know that you can put them off. Again, if you happen to be a caregiver or the administrator, it's perfectly acceptable to say, as we have here at the bottom of the slide, I'm not authorized to speak about that, but I'd be happy to connect you with someone who is. I would just caution, when you get that call, please make sure you do forward the call to the appropriate person. Let them know any discussions that you had so everybody is prepared when that call comes in. For those of you who may have to do the interview, the process might seem a little scary, but it's not. As I noted at the beginning, I am a former journalist, and I can assure you that we're not all bad people, and we're not as horrible as some people make us out to be. You know, honestly, reporters aren't out to get you. Yeah, there is, I will admit, a lot more advocacy journalism today, and some reporters don't have the time to dig too deeply into projects. We actually have another scenario where we have some reporters who are diving too deeply into it, but they're diving deeply into it using sources that aren't the best sources because they're advocates for another cause. But for the most part, at the local level, a reporter has a job to do and is reaching out and is really seeking to tell a story and to tell one that's accurate. So a reporter's job is to get information, and our job is to provide that truthful, strategic information. And in the information that we provide, we want to always go back to the guidance that we have and those foundational points. Again, those are the things that we want to say and what we want people to hear. So as we're providing information, we're always looking for the opportunity to pivot back to those points. The interviews are almost non-life-threatening, although they can at times be incredibly uncomfortable. I think we all recognize that, whether you've never done an interview or you don't do them regularly. Sometimes they are not the most pleasant thing, but that's why you need to understand the nature of the request and why you need to prepare and rehearse repeatedly. And I emphasize repeatedly there because whether it's your first time doing an interview or your CEO who's done them before, rehearsing is really important. The key to rehearsing is coming up with a list of questions, and we'll get into this a little bit later, coming up with a list of questions, coming up with the answers for them, and then really going through that Q&A in front of your peers or with yourself several times. It's much better to make a mistake in front of your coworkers than it is in front of the press. And then lastly is your attitude, how it can make or break an interview, and we're going to see that a good example of that in the video in just a minute. Interviews aren't just about memorizing talking points either. I know I emphasize those key points. The foundational points are really important to have in mind at the tip of your tongue, in the back of your head, anywhere where they can, instinctually come out. But interviews are more than just about talking points. It's important to know not just who you're talking to, but who's asking the questions and what medium they publish, where it's going to be broadcast or published. We really have, we really have three outlets: television, radio, and print. Although I don't think many of you are going to be doing studio interviews where you have to arrive early, worry about makeup and things like that. Maybe a camera does come to the facility or you invite one in. When you're doing an interview on TV, the key there is not to look at the camera, but to look at the interviewer instead. This really helps with nerves, allowing for a conversation rather than an interview. And I can tell you that most TV reporters, when they come to you, generally will engage you in small talk or banter for several minutes as the camera is getting set up or they're putting the microphone on you, just to help you yourself work through those nervous few minutes of being on camera. Because, for a television reporter, their package is really only as good as the clips you can give them. So they want to work with you to make sure that you're comfortable in your speaking as well. Radio, obviously, for the ear, quick sound bites. It's always my favorite interviews to do because you're usually doing them by phone. You can have your notes in front of you. But the thing I would emphasize about radio, it's one where you want to use anecdotes rather than just giving facts. Talk about what the families tell us is, or the hundreds of men and women who rely on our long-term care centers tell us. So radio is a good place to provide that those anecdotal pieces. It works in TV to a certain degree, but TV is a much more visual where they can go and show in the B-roll. And then for print, print is much more of a longer form journalism. It's a great opportunity to speak in depth. Print reporters are also someone that will, after you're done with the interview, you can follow up repeatedly, send reports, send additional information, and because the stories are longer, they have more space to tell the story. In any of these cases, I would emphasize, if you think you've made a mistake in any of the interviews, go back and correct them. For television and radio, if you're not on the air live, it's okay to stop what you're saying and restart. If you fumble on a sentence, just stop, take a breath, and say, do you mind if I restate that, or do you mind if I start that over? Because again, these outlets their packages really are built on the sound bites that you provide. The key to any good interview really begins in the anticipation and preparation that goes into it beforehand. And we talked a little bit about this, but whether it's you or your communications team, you want to know the reporter's name and phone number, the nature of the inquiry, and the deadline. And if you have the reporter's name, it doesn't hurt to go and do a Google search to see what type of reporting they've done in the past, especially if they've been doing long-term care stories, so you have an idea of how they might be coming at you and the angle they might be taking. Again, you want to anticipate the key questions, not just the ones that the reporter gave you, but also the ones that might not be so comfortable to answer, and come up with your response to those. And you want to practice and prepare those your responses to those as much as you can in advance of any interview. I will say that it used to be pretty standard that when a reporter called, you would ask for questions. And generally, there's no rule that says reporters have to give you questions in advance of an interview. I have seen just in the era over the last 2 decades, in the era of email, that reporters are sort of much more inclined to provide at least a few questions. You should always anticipate, however, that while those few questions provide a guidepost, they are not going to be the exclusive and only questions that are asked. But it's okay to ask a reporter for questions, but the point here is if they don't provide you with them, that's okay, because it's not exactly standard practice, and they're not required to under the ethics of their own profession. During the interview, again, stick to your key messages. Find ways, no matter what the questions are, to pivot back and come back to them. You want to remain calm. Always give those honest answers and correct mistakes. Again, don't be afraid to say you don't know something in an interview. That it's really okay to say, I don't know, I'm not sure, I have to check on that. Again, as we talked about earlier, a reporter's job is to get facts and to present those facts accurately, and our role is to make sure that they have accurate information. So if you don't have it at your fingertips or during the interview, it's okay to say, I don't know, I have to check on that, I'll get back to you, but just follow through on that commitment. Now, here's a couple things you don't want to do in an interview. Number one, don't go off the record. I would say that this is more for those of you who aren't in a professional communications field, especially for our administrators, our caregivers. There are rules in journalism for off-the-record, deep background and background about how you can share information with reporters and not be cited as a source. But I would leave that to the professionals. For all of you, I would say that anything that you say is always on the record. You don't want to say no comment either. It looks very defensive. Think about all those 60-minute interviews you see where somebody's saying no comment and running away from the camera. It presents a very bad picture. The next one is call reporter on deadline. That's a little bit more challenging in this environment. I can tell you a story where I was calling a reporter at 3 o'clock, and he said he was on deadline, so I hung up with him because he had to post his first story online. And the story that he posted online happened to be the story that I was calling him about, and I had to call him back at 3:05 to ask him to correct it. So reporter deadlines are always a little bit different nowadays with online reporting, but generally you can use some common sense and know don't call a TV reporter around noon or 5 o'clock when they're preparing to go on the air. Best times are usually after lunch or early in the morning. You don't want to over-answer or get fixated on one question. Over-answering is where you're asked a question, you answer the question, and you tend to keep going and going. That might give more ammunition or more information to a reporter and lead him or her down a different trail that you don't want to go. So just simply answer the question and move on to the next. And don't get fixated on one question where, as you're going through the interview, you keep thinking about the response that you gave previously to another question. It's different if you think that you answered that question or provided a fact that was inaccurate and you need to correct it. There's another thing to start thinking, why did he ask that question? Why did she ask that question? Because it really can affect your interview going forward. We already talked about correcting the record. Repeating a reporter's negative statement we'll get to when we get into some of the sample Q&A. But again, just emphasize that, get the facts, don't wing it, and really just try to stay on message. We're going to look at our next video here, which gives a pretty good example about what we were talking about in terms of attitude.
Noon tonight at 6 o'clock, Pennsylvania is putting the brakes on one ambulance and transportation company.
State inspectors found that some vehicles as well as drivers, they're not road ready to respond to your emergency. NBC 10 investigative reporter Harry Harrison has been working on this story for nearly a week now. Harry, what have you uncovered?
Well, Jim and Renee, what people in the industry are calling an unprecedented move, two state agencies say they have launched investigations into Keystone Quality Transport, inspecting the company's vehicles and personnel, taking some vehicles and drivers off the road. These orange stickers on the back of ambulances say it all. Out of service by the Pennsylvania Department of Health Bureau of Emergency Medical Services.
We look at things like, do they have the minimum equipment? If they're carrying drugs and devices that may have expiration dates, are they expired?
Richard Gibbons, director of the State Bureau of EMS, confirms Keystone is under investigation. He declined to talk specifics, but says when an ambulance gets one of these stickers, there's a problem.
There can be a variety of issues, but generally there's something about the vehicle that makes it an immediate threat or potential immediate threat to life safety, and therefore we put it out of service until it's corrected.
A source tells us the state red tagged 30 ambulances, taking them off the road. I went to Keystone for comments.
The numbers for those were red tagged were how many?
I'm not really sure.
Well, you got to know as president and CEO approximately how many vans you guys have out of service, wouldn't you?
Who said I was president and CEO?
Are you Steve Barr?
Yes. I didn't introduce myself that way, huh?
Well, I did my own work.
Oh, okay.
Steve Barr does say the inspection caught him by surprise.
Well, it was a pop-up inspection.
And just when Keystone had his hands full with the health department, entered the Public Utility Commission. The PUC says the complaint from the Department of Health has been investigating transport drivers, those who pick up clients with some medical needs. The commission is concerned some drivers may not have the proper medical paperwork to prove they're fit to drive.
Several drivers have been taken out of service at this point for lack of possession of a medical card.
The fact is, we've been in business for 20 years, and we have a clean record with the Pennsylvania Department of Health and an excellent safety record in the region.
Barr says the company already had some of its ambulances out of service before the state's investigation, but couldn't say how many. Barr says he's cooperating with the state and adds his company has done nothing wrong.
So the president and CEO, whether he wants to admit it or not, finally did get across his point, but it was at the end, and his point was much too late, about the safety record of his company and how long they've been in operation. The key here is really your attitude can make or break an interview. Why this guy would pretend to be someone he's not, or decline to even answer, why he would open the door and then decline to even answer the simplest question about who he is and what his title is really beyond me. But, anytime you go into an interview, you want to use facts and real information. You don't want to play games or be clever. You think you can be clever and get away with it, but you never really are. But the emphasis here is really just on, if you're going to open your door to an interview, then you need to be ready with the right attitude to answer the questions. Again, really, he's the president and CEO, so he's the face of the operation. And what type of lasting impression did he leave here? You never think these things are going to happen, but invariably, somebody always does this, and there are more than enough examples out there for us to show. So just to really reinforce a few points, you want to be polite and act professionally. People really respect someone who remains calm, especially when confronted. The attitude, again, can make or break the situation. You don't want to look angry. You want to stay positive and confident and stick to your key points. And you only want to say what you know without winging it. We're going to use this next video as sort of the transition into engaging the media where you potentially reach out to them. Here's a good news story with a resident who was turning 110 years old. But we picked this example to show you that even good news stories really need to be managed appropriately.
Good morning. Yes, we are out here at the Cheney Care Center, and I am sitting next to the woman on the front page of the Spokesman Review this morning. This is mug. She is enjoying some coffee this morning because, Flossie, you say you're a little tired this morning. Is that right?
I am tired.
She is very tired. That's actually, I heard, your favorite activity to do at the center here is to take a little nap.
You can nap many times as I can.
As many times as she can, she likes to take a nap. Flossie has 3 children. You have 12 grandchildren, 20 great-grandchildren, and 15 great-great-grandchildren. You sound like a very busy lady. Yes, she has lived in multiple places in the Northwest, even lived in Arizona. She's originally from Oregon. That's where she was born. And Flossie, this morning, we also have some flowers that we would like to give you. She got her nails done. I don't know if you can see, but they're a beautiful pink. Pink and purple, we heard, were your favorite colors. So I'm just going to set those on your lap for you. And I'll hold them. How about that, so that they stay? Later today, Flossie's family is going to be coming out here to throw you a big birthday party. Are you excited for your party?
Not one bit.
You would rather be taking a nap, huh? Anyway, I'm here with Chris Barr. Chris, you have known Flossie. Come on in here. Yes?
Well, I know there's a bit of a delay here, but stay with me. Can you ask Flossie, 110, obviously she knows a few secrets here. What is the key to live that long?
Yes, I've been trying to get that out of her. Flossie, the people on TV want to know what the secret is to being able to live so long.
I don't know. I don't fight it. I live it.
She doesn't fight it, she lives it, and that's what her...
This segment goes on for several more minutes, so for the sake of time, we're going to cut it short, but you can look at the link on the package. But first of all, let's give credit where credit is due. This is a very well-intended story, and it's a good story to tell. So the facility had somebody who was 110 years old celebrating a story, a perfect human interest story. They reached out to the reporters. It was a great idea, but it was a big gamble, especially when you agreed to go live. Maybe if you just invite the TV station in for a party or something, that would have been much better because they would have been able to get the clips and the sound bites and put that into a nice package. Because it sure looked like Flossie, this was something that she didn't want to endure, which probably wasn't the image that the facility wanted. And honestly, this was probably a better print story than with photography than it was a live feature, especially one that goes on for 4 to 6 minutes with somebody who doesn't really want to engage. And you saw that there was a print story there. But again, I want to give credit to the facility for reaching out, and wouldn't want to discourage anybody from doing that. It's just a case study in that even in good news stories, you need to manage them appropriately. As we want to turn our attention now, to encouraging you to find opportunities to tell your story, because really, if you're not telling the story, then somebody else is filling that vacuum for you. And it's really important that the stories that you have are told. So when that first call comes in, what do we want to do? We want to embrace the opportunity because those interviews give us a chance to comment productively, share a story, and really position our sector or your own facility as a leader. We want to be confident and positive, and remember that you do have support, whether it's through your own internal communications office or through PHCA. It's really important that these stories are shared and heard, and there's a team and a group behind you to make sure that they are. And then third, we talked about it over and over, is preparing and rehearsing. And last is just personalizing the story to tell it from your perspective or from that of the resident. So you want to leave that lasting impression. It's one thing to give almost anecdotally, like we talked about on the radio. It's one thing to just give facts. It's another thing to say, our nursing home is hurting right now. Or it's a different thing to say, we have residents in our community who are finding it harder and harder to place a loved one in a facility within their community. On the proactive side of things, opposite of taking a call is placing one. If you have a good idea for a story, please contact Eric Keel at PHCA, who can help guide you and give you some advice about whether it's a good story, how to approach the story, and what the pitch would be. So again, a plug for the support that you have through PHCA. Next, you really want to know your media market. I'm sure all of you have the newspaper, watch television. You know which reporter does the healthcare, does the enterprise pieces or the feature pieces. If you're going to do something with long-term care, you probably don't want to make the call to the investigative journalist. So just know your market a little bit and understand the reporter that you want to reach out to. It's very easy to find the information for them online. You don't need a media list. And I can tell you that you don't have to be worried about reaching out to reporters. As a former reporter, I can tell you we never have enough sources. We always have editors who are trying to tell us we got to find more story ideas. So don't be afraid to reach out to a reporter with an idea. The key, again, is just making sure you have one that's relatable. It's not if you have you have somebody coming to speak at your facility. That's probably not a news story. That's probably something that is probably for the community events pages. If that person coming to speak at your facility is the Department of Health and she's coming to speak about opioids in senior communities, that's probably a little bit more newsworthy. You want to create a subject line that grabs the attention. For this, I would just say sort of think about those tabloid newspapers and the headlines they write, or the headlines your local TV stations put online, or your newspapers. You want to try to model it after them, and also think shorter is better, because most people are looking at these things. Their first glance is going to be on a cell phone. So what's the subject line that's going to fit on a subject in the subject line of a smartphone? And then lastly is just submitting it. Again, if you're not submitting the story, it's not going to get told. If the reporter doesn't get back to you or says no, don't worry about it. Move on to the next one, or offer to come back to that reporter with something else. Just be persistent. Calling a reporter to check on making sure they got it. They might say no when you check up, or they might say, oh, I got that. I just didn't have time to get to it. Can we talk next week? So persistence does work whenever you're trying to pitch reporters on a story. In terms of persistence, here's our final video of the presentation. A great example by Michelle Hamilton of Country Meadows. She had a mission. She wanted to tell this story about a couple that got married, and she found a way to do it. So to set up this clip, Michelle was on a segment called Pennsylvania Newsmakers. It gives her about 10 minutes on this public affairs program to talk about anything that she wanted. Before going on, she actually rehearsed and practiced before the interview, did a media training, in fact, with us, so she was ready to go. But again, she wanted to tell this story. It never came up in the interview, but she was incredibly persistent. So as her segment is ending, Michelle found a way to do it.
I know, real quick, but we had two residents at our YMSA campus in Reading. They came in early 90s. They were alone. They had lost their spouses. They came in only thinking they were going to be in for a month or two. In their early 90s, fell in love, got married.
Oh my God.
We had a big, beautiful wedding.
That is wonderful.
That's what you find
in
assisted living.
All right, coming up, big stories of the week with two of the state ladies.
So there you go. Congratulations to Michelle. Mission accomplished. Like I said, she went into that interview knowing that was the one story that she wanted to tell. It never really found the opportunity during the Q&A, but before that program ended, she worked it into her piece. We're going to close the presentation with just some Q&A scenarios. Again, what we would normally do is run through these Q&A scenarios and then put somebody on camera to see what they've learned from the presentations, and a lot of these questions are included in them. But they serve as a great template for understanding how interviews work. As I said, reporters have their own way of asking questions to try to get responses from the people they're interviewing. It's not good form to ask just yes or no questions where your interview subject can just say yes or no. So they do have some techniques of their own to try to elicit some responses, and we're going to go through some of the examples here and about how you can answer these. The first one is the machine gunner, and that's where somebody just bombards you with several questions. Recent reports indicate that the quality of skilled nursing care is diminished. How do you respond to these charges? What's your CMS star rating? How was your last survey? What you want to do is you want to answer at your own pace and not the reporter's pace. You've asked me several questions. Let me start with the first one. Or if that's not the way you want to do it, pick one of the questions that he or she has asked and answer the one that's favorable. But again, what you want to do is you want to slow the process down and answer at your own pace. Next up, we have the loaded question, which sort of is forcing you to choose between two negatives. So isn't it true that if all these long-term care facilities are settling lawsuits, then they must have been doing something wrong in the first place? Be firm in your response. That's not the case at all. Pennsylvania skilled nursing facilities remain the target of out-of-state predatory lawyers who are filing frivolous lawsuits. So don't get pushed into a corner by a negative anecdote or the reporter's pessimism. You want to stick to the points you know and present the facts as they are and as we know them. Next up is the open-ended question. This is one where the reporter is looking for you to lead the conversation or offer opinions. So, what's your take on the outcry about everything going on in Washington, D.C. and how it might affect your sector? Again, pivot to what you know and what you trust, because you have a story to tell. You walked into this interview knowing what you wanted to say, so make sure that if he's going to give you an open-ended question, that you use it as an opportunity to tell your story. So, look, we pay attention to any policy that's proposed, whether at the state or federal level, and we study it closely. But what I really want to talk about today is the work that we're doing here. Next up is the paraphraser. This would be a reporter who is trying to simplify or sum up what you said, sometimes not correctly. So what you're really saying is that Pennsylvania isn't prepared to handle its rapidly aging population, and facilities like yours aren't equipped to serve them. Again, don't let the reporter paraphrase you. Go back to your message, say your words, not somebody else's. And what I'm saying is providing quality care each and every day is hard and costly, especially as residents suffer from more clinically complex medical conditions. So again, repeat your words and don't let reporters paraphrase what you said, especially if it's inaccurate. Headlining encourages that broad conclusion without the facts to support it. Isn't it fair to say that the majority of residents don't want state government to spend more money on things like long-term care? Here's one where you actually have the facts to contradict or correct a reporter. That's not true. A recent independent poll found this, and present the facts. So state only the facts and don't answer it for others with allowing any broad conclusions. Needling is another one. If any of you have brothers and sisters, you're probably used to them needling you. Reporters will do the same thing to their subjects. Did you really mean that, or don't you really think what you should say is, you're an incredibly large organization with a massive budget. Are you saying there's no way to make these improvements or enhance your services unless you get state support? What you want to do, again, is stick to your key message and back it up with additional facts and information. The cost of care is rising, as are the costs of everything from labor to drugs and medical supplies, and it just gets to the point where we simply can't do any more. So don't let the needling push you into corner and providing an answer that diverges from the messages that you have. Lastly is probably the most important one, and it's one that reporters use more than any other, and it's the hypothetical if. If you're ever in an interview and you hear a question begin with if, the alarm bells should start going off. Once a reporter is asking you to answer something about an incident or an issue that hasn't happened yet. It's an incredibly hypothetical situation for which there is no answer and really no good guess. So a good example would be if Pennsylvania decided to cut all long-term care funding from its budget, what would happen to all the people in these facilities? Our answer is protecting our seniors is a core function of government, and they have a responsibility to them. What I can say is that we work with elected officials to ensure resources are used in the best way to care for those individuals in need. You don't answer questions for which there are no real answers. Obviously, we know what would happen if the budget were to slash to a zero. It's not going to happen. We don't know what the cuts would be, and we don't want to answer for something that isn't clear and isn't that isn't happening. So respond frankly and clearly, and try to give the best response. But again, if you do hear that hypothetical if you do hear that hypothetical if, that should be that should raise a red flag for you. Just finally, some helpful tips to pivot to those points like we talked about. Stand by your statements. I think that's a generalization. The fact of the matter is, if the reporter interrupts, don't be afraid to listen politely, but go back, as I was saying, and make sure that you always have the final word. This last point is really one of the ones that I want to leave you with. Always go in, we talked about having your foundational statements, but always have your one critical, most important statement that you want to emphasize, because at the end of every interview, you are going to find a reporter who says, is there something I missed? Is there anything you want to add? And that's where you say yes. And you can add your single, rehearsed, practiced, perfect statement right there at the end. And I can tell you 9 out of 10 times when I see that happen, that's usually the clip that I hear on the air or see on the TV or see in print, because it's the one you want to say, and it's the one that's the best form for you. So just in closing, again, understanding the nature of the request and the reporter making it, the medium, knowing what your message is and what you want to say and sticking to it, anticipating those key questions and rehearsing repeatedly, and don't be afraid to ask others for help. You do have a pretty good and robust network of support through PHCA and probably through your own networks. And so with that, I'll close it out, and Wendy, see if we have any questions from the folks on the line. And thanks to everybody for welcoming us here and letting us give you a presentation on media training. Hope it helped.
Thank you, Kurt. That was great information that you shared today. The videos, I think, were really helpful, and it's something different that we haven't done, at least since I've been hosting the webinars here. So that was made things really interesting and gave really great examples. At this time, we're going to open up the question and answer portion. Please submit any questions using your question box on the right hand of your screen. And while we're waiting, I will, in follow-up, provide Kurt and Eric's contact information, that if you have situations and have questions or, have opportunities, media opportunities, you can feel free to reach out to them at any time. So you'll have their contact information when I get that message out later today.
And Wendy, I would add on the Harrisburg office on the slide there, the telephone number there is my direct desk line. So if anybody did want to reach me, they could just call that.
Perfect. All right. And also, while we're waiting for questions, don't forget that PHCA does have webinars. We are recording our webinars, so they are available on our website. If you need to go back or share it with anyone, please feel free. And don't forget, we have at least 2 webinars a month, sometimes more. Our next webinar is next Wednesday, June 6th at 2 p.m., and that's Recognizing Pain in People with Dementia. And then we have another webinar scheduled for later in June on the long-term care trend tracker. So look for those, and we'll be adding more throughout the summer. And we do have webinars scheduled through the end of the year, and we will be adding more. So we'll just give it another minute. I don't see any questions coming in, but know again that you can reach out to Kurt directly and also to Eric Keel here in our office at any time. This is a quiet group today. I think everyone's still recovering from the holiday week. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll wrap things up. Again, don't forget, we'll be emailing a survey later today and a recording of today's presentation. So please take a moment and complete the survey. And I want to thank Kurt again for his time today in presenting on this topic, and just want to wish everybody a great rest of the week.
Great, and thank you, Wendy. Appreciate it, the opportunity.